Hello, my name is Maris, and the day I walked into Crescent Bank just to withdraw $100, my own sister, the branch manager, laughed in my face and said, "We do not serve beggars here." That humiliation could have been the end of me. But she had no idea that behind the silence I carried, I held the power to drain her kingdom with a single signature. So when I opened my folder and whispered, "If I may, I would like to make a withdrawal of the truth," the bank froze. Forks dropped, smiles shattered, and the same sister who mocked me for asking $100 watched in horror as I withdrew $3.5 billion instead. Would you have stayed silent in that moment, or spoken the words that turned the entire room upside down? Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and if you want to hear more true family drama stories like this, subscribe. Thank you for supporting this channel. The chill had come early this year in Cincinnati. Leaves clung stubbornly to the last branches along 4th Street as a restless wind swept in from the river, carrying with it a bite that hinted winter would not wait its turn. The sidewalk glittered faintly from last night's frost, each step sounding sharper in the still morning. I pulled the scarf tighter around my neck, deep wine red, soft against my skin. I had bought it at a street fair years ago on a day I had dared to feel proud of simply being alive. Back then, $20 had felt like defiance, a small claim on dignity. I stepped through the heavy glass doors of the downtown Crescent Bank branch, not because I had much to withdraw, but because Mrs. Elowyn Price from down the hall had quietly asked if I could spot her grocery money until Friday. I had seen the way her fingers trembled when she opened the fridge door, and how she smiled too brightly while skipping dinner. $100 would keep her pantry from echoing hollow. That was reason enough. The bank smelled faintly of eucalyptus and polished wood, sleek, sanitized, as though wealth itself had been scrubbed into the walls. Everyone inside looked like they belonged. The floor shimmered under the fluorescent lights. I wore thrifted jeans, clean but faded, and a coat I had stitched at the seams twice already this winter. Still I stood tall. The line inched forward at its own pace. I kept my eyes ahead, my heart steady. Yet I could already feel a few glances crawling across me, the kind people give when they cannot quite decide if you are lost or simply poor. Then I heard it. Well, is this not a surprise? The voice slithered just behind my ear before I even turned. Refined, performative, polished like glass that had never known a crack. Odette. She wore winter white, of course she did. Her heels clicked like punctuation across the tile as she moved closer. Every step rehearsed a smile glued in place, like it had been painted there. Behind her, a young teller trailed nervously, eyes darting. "Maris Odette," said her tone syrupy sweet, loud enough for the rest of the line to catch. "Still using this branch, are we?" I did not answer. Not yet. I looked at her, and only her. The same painted lips, the same smug tilt of her chin. She never needed to raise her voice to command a scene. Her presence alone rearranged the air in the room. She leaned in her perfume sharp as she murmured, "You know we have updated our client tiers. We do not really serve walk-ins anymore." Then she added louder, each syllable precise, "Especially not beggars." A man in a navy suit looked up from his phone. An older woman near the window turned her head. I stayed still. The word echoed like a slap in a cathedral. Odette smiled wider as if she had just performed a charity. "You do understand, do you not?" I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I had learned long ago that silence is sometimes louder than shouting. I touched the scarf at my neck, the fibers familiar, my fingers resting there a moment longer than they needed to. Then I stepped out of the line. My boots made no sound on the tile as I walked past Odette without another word. Outside, the cold kissed my face with a kind of mercy. My reflection in the bank's polished glass door lingered for a second, head high. Eyes steady. I did not cry. Not anymore. That night, back in my apartment, I peeled off my coat and scarf. The place smelled of peppermint tea and old books, my kind of peace. I set the scarf gently on the table, folded it once, then again, letting my hand rest over it. I powered on the old laptop tucked beneath the couch cushion. The screen flickered twice. Before settling, I typed in my passphrase. Fingers moving without hesitation, each keystroke practiced and certain. A soft ping followed one encrypted message. Expected, yet still grounding. I read it twice, letting the words sink in, then closed the lid. My heart did not race. It moved slower with purpose, like a steady drum guiding me. Across the room, I picked up the scarf once more. The last time I had worn it like armor was years ago when Odette called me nothing but a soft-spoken parasite at a Christmas party I had not even been invited to. I remembered whispering to myself afterward while buttoning my coat alone in the snow. One day they will see. Tonight I did not whisper. I did not need to. Instead, I reached for my phone and dialed a number none of them even knew I possessed. The line connected. "Hey," I said, voice calm and deliberate. "It is Maris. I need a favor, a serious one." I did not answer Odette's calls that night. Not that she ever truly called. She never does. But for a moment, I let myself imagine what she would say if she knew I still had access to the one person who could shut her entire branch down with a single command. By the time I returned to my apartment, the late November air had settled into a heavy stillness. Cincinnati streets gleamed with moisture from an earlier drizzle, the streetlights flickering across the sheen of wet pavement. I climbed the narrow stairs to my second-floor unit, each familiar creak grounding me step by step. I slipped the wine-colored scarf from my neck and hung it carefully by the door. It looked different now, not like something to hide behind, but like something I had chosen deliberately. Inside the apartment was quiet, save for the low hum of my old radiator. I made a cup of tea I barely touched, then sat down at the small dining table that doubled as my workspace. I pulled the laptop toward me, its edges worn smooth from years of use. It took 3 layers of encrypted login to get through first, a fingerprint scan, then a 6-digit rotating code routed through a secure satellite line, and finally a phrase I typed slowly and with care. Foxglove never forgets. For a breath, the screen stayed black. Then the portal opened a sleek interface few in the world had ever seen, and fewer still had the credentials to navigate. My name was nowhere on it, and that was intentional. In another life, or perhaps just another version of this one, I had helped design a security protocol so airtight it made headlines without ever mentioning us. Back then, I went by a different name, M. Dove, an alias built from an inside joke and a real bird I once nursed back to health on a foster farm in Arizona. The message pinged in from Jonas Rourke, "You are finally ready." I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment, then typed back, "It is time. Let us begin." He did not ask why, he never did. We had designed it that way, clean no back and forth only purpose. When I first walked away from my family, it was not out of shame. It was strategy. Every time I tried to tell them I had plans that I was not going to just drift through life, they laughed. "You, my father once scoffed, tossing my resume onto the table without so much as a glance. You will be lucky if a gas station lets you wipe the windows." Odette was worse. "Maybe aim lower, Maris," she said flatly, when I mentioned applying for a fintech internship. "The world does not owe you a fancy desk or a corner office." They all laughed. And then I vanished. Not because I was weak, but because I needed the space to build something real. They would never touch Jonas, and I had registered the fund through 5 different countries, each one with its own wall of legality. We called it Shell Code 7. I handled the system architecture and the trust design while he raised the initial capital. By the end of year 2, I held the majority stake tucked safely behind layers of fiduciary anonymity. No one, not even my accountant, could link me to it without direct access to this terminal. And Odette, her bank, had been trying to woo Shell Code 7 as a silent partner for years. They had finally succeeded in hosting a portion of our liquidity last quarter. I reviewed the contract myself, watching her signature appear neatly under the onboarding papers, completely unaware of who she was signing beneath. When our father passed, Odette was handed the estate. My name was not mentioned. For her own good, the will read as though keeping me poor was some twisted act of mercy. Now I opened the command panel and typed carefully, "Show me active accounts under shell code 7. The screen populated instantly. Figures rolled across the interface, quiet, precise, unforgiving. $3.5 billion in liquid assets. It was not just money. It was leverage. It was time. With this, I could buy silence. I could break dignity. I could reclaim. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, a tremor of uncertainty flickering through me. For a second, I felt that old tug. What if they are right? What if I am still that girl begging for crumbs? But then I remembered Odette's voice at the bank. "We do not serve beggars here." And I pressed enter. The room did not change. Nothing exploded. But inside me something shifted, like a thread that had been tangled for years, finally snapped into place. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the weight of it sit heavy in my hands before setting it down. Then I reached for my phone. I scrolled past the names of people I had not spoken to in years, past group chats I had muted into oblivion, until I tapped one single contact. Schedule an appointment tomorrow in person at Odette's branch. I looked over at the scarf by the door. It was no longer a shield. Now it was a marker of everything they believed I was not, and everything I never needed to prove until this moment. By the time I stepped out of the car and adjusted the lapels of my jacket, the morning sun had climbed high enough to reflect off the tall windows of the main branch downtown. I stood for a long second at the base of those glass doors, not hesitating, but letting the moment truly settle. It was strange how calm my hands felt. No shaking, no second thoughts. A man in a grey suit held the door open for me. "Ma'am, please." He nodded, and I offered a polite smile before walking inside. The same marble floors stretched out beneath me. The same fresh scent of over-polished wood hung in the air. But this time, everything looked smaller, somehow less intimidating. The reception desk was manned by a young woman I did not recognize. "Good morning, welcome to—" "I have an appointment," I said softly, pulling a sleek black folio from my bag. "It is under Shell Code Holdings." Before she could ask another question, her screen blinked red. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Just then, from across the lobby, I saw Odette. She had changed since yesterday. Fresh makeup hair curled just a little tighter than usual. She was laughing with a regional client near the coffee machine, her hands gesturing lightly. But the moment she spotted me, her face hardened. She crossed the floor like a storm cloud in heels. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I told you yesterday we are not a charity. Whatever ridiculous stunt you are trying to pull, do not." I did not reply. Instead, I simply handed the folio over to the receptionist. She opened it, scanned a QR code tucked neatly into the side panel, and blinked again. "I will need to get the manager," the receptionist said quickly, already picking up the phone. Odette reached over and yanked the folio right out of the woman's hands. "Enough. Let us see what my little sister thinks she is playing at this time." She flipped through the papers, her smirk lingering until it began to slip. And then it happened. Her eyes froze. She glanced down, flipped one more page, and looked up again. Only this time she did not say anything. She could not. Have you ever been in a moment where the truth finally turned the tables, and the person who mocked you had nothing left to say? Share your thoughts in the comments, even a simple one, if you have felt that power. The branch manager arrived, a tall man with silver hair and a calm presence, the kind of person trained to handle crisis without ever showing a crack. He took the folio firmly from Odette's hands. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, nodding respectfully to me. "Give me just a moment." He glanced at the screen, typed something quickly, and then he stopped. He turned to Odette, his voice quieter now, but carrying weight. "This is a VIP-level authorization. Primary withdrawal request, flagged as sensitive. Shell Code Holdings. You are listed as an employee in a partnered entity. Did you know this?" The silence that fell over the bank was not just quiet. It was suspended, tense, electric. A few junior bankers turned to look. I heard a sharp inhale from someone behind a cubicle. Odette backed up half a step, the color draining swiftly from her cheeks. That cannot be real. That has to be some kind of fake. It is real, I said, meeting her eyes without blinking. You have been working for me. Indirectly, of course, all these years while laughing behind my back. The manager's assistant whispered something urgent to him. He nodded once, then read directly from his screen. Withdrawal authorized. Amount requested $3.5 billion. Confirmed entity signature. Lockdown initiated for audit compliance. Lobby closed pending security validation. The receptionist moved quickly to lock the front doors. One of the younger associates dropped her pen, the sound sharp against the marble floor. Odette's mouth opened, but no words came out. She stood pale and stiff. Then, like something inside her cracked, she stumbled forward. Actually stumbled and dropped to her knees right in front of me. Maris, she whispered, eyes wide, almost pleading. Do not do this, please. Do not ruin everything. You do not understand what this will do to me. Please, I have a child. I have a career. I tilted my head slightly. You ruined yourself, I said, my voice low, steady, and even. All I ever did was step back and let you. Behind her, someone gasped. The manager did not intervene. No one did. Odette shook her head, her mascara already smudging beneath her wide eyes. You are my sister, please, she whispered desperately. Am I asked. You all made it clear a long time ago that I was never truly part of the family. For a second, the only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. No shouts, no alarms, just silence, and eyes, dozens of them, watching this woman who had once paraded her power, now curled up on the floor, begging. I turned to the manager. I would like to speak to someone from the executive suite privately. This matter does not need to be handled here on the main floor. He nodded instantly, already pressing the call button for the internal elevator. We will bring you to the investor lounge right away, he said. As I walked past Odette, still frozen, I did not even glance down. The folio stayed firmly tucked under my arm, and as the glass doors of the elevator slid shut, I heard nothing behind me but the kind of silence that said, everything had just changed. I did not even make it to the couch before my phone buzzed again. The glass door had only just clicked shut behind me, and I was still sliding out of my heels. I glanced at the screen. Althea. Straight to voicemail. I did not need to hear her voice right now, not when I could already guess the tone. Tight, fake, overly concerned, like she was calling out of obligation instead of care. I poured myself a glass of Pinot and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the cool night air settle my chest. The city hummed below distant sirens, a bus groaning at the corner, someone laughing 4 floors down. All of it felt quieter than usual, as if the world itself knew something had shifted. Another buzz. Malcolm, this time Althea's husband. I hesitated, then picked up. If nothing else, Malcolm was predictable. He always called when something was at stake. Maris, he said, drawing my name out like he had rehearsed it, warmth attempted but not quite landing. Evening, Malcolm, I said, resting my wine glass on the railing. Did Althea lose her voice? He gave a forced chuckle. No, she is just... Well, you know how she gets when things catch her completely off guard. I did not reply. I actually wanted to check in, he went on. Saw some movement, a few, transfers showing up. Impressive, really. We did not know you were so deeply involved in that level of finance. Is that so? I said lightly. Because I have always been told to stay in my lane. Malcolm coughed. Just making sure everything is kosher, you know. With the trust, the assets. Althea mentioned you had been investing in some projects, private ones. I did not answer right away. My gaze drifted toward a blinking tower in the distance. You mean the ones you all used to laugh at during brunch when Althea said I should marry someone rich instead of pretending to be a founder? His silence hung in the air like smoke. It is funny. I continued slowly how my phone only rings when there is a dollar sign attached to it. Malcolm cleared his throat again. Well, Althea and I were thinking, maybe we should all get together, talk through things. No pressure, just brunch. Maybe this coming weekend. The audacity almost made me smile. I am afraid my weekends are quite full. Lots of pretending to be important, I said lightly. I did not mean it like that, he said quickly, almost stumbling over his own voice. It is just, Althea thinks maybe we did not always treat you as fairly as we should have. There it was a drop of half apology soaked in self-interest. I appreciate the outreach, I said evenly, but I do not think brunch will fix what has already been broken. I ended the call gently and set the phone down beside me. My fingers were steady now, no tremble, no heat of anger, just calm. The kind of peace I had not felt in years. I went inside and opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The screen blinked to life, and with a few clicks, I pulled up the dashboard. My dashboard. The company logo hovered in the corner, understated and professional. One of the top 10 holding companies in the region. My name sat quietly in the ownership tab. Still, the controlling shareholder still untouched. Then came a message flashing in the corner of the screen. It was from Nadine. Odette just tried to access the executive panel, it read. I blocked her attempt. I exhaled through a grin. Of course she did. I typed back quickly. Let them wonder. I leaned back, sipping the last of the wine. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for the leather folio tucked on the second shelf of my bookcase. Inside it, beneath contracts and sealed letters, was a photograph worn at the edges, faint from the sun but unmistakable. Me, maybe 8 years old, hair a wild mess, a front tooth missing, and my grandfather kneeling beside me, holding up a rusted wrench, like we had just fixed the entire world. You always said I was the one no one saw coming, I whispered softly. That man had been the only one who looked past my silence, past the awkwardness, and had said, let her build. She will surprise you. I brushed my thumb across the photo, and then my phone buzzed again. A new message from Nadine. They just invited you to a family dinner. Want me to accept on your behalf? I stared at the screen, then at the photograph in my hand. I was not sure if they were truly looking for closure or if they just smelled money. I did not respond to Nadine's message right away. I sat with the invitation still glowing on my screen, my fingers tracing the edge of the trackpad without clicking. A family dinner after months of silence and then a sudden storm of voicemails. They had suddenly remembered I existed only when it suited them. I waited a day, then another. Finally, I texted Nadine back. Yes. Except I want to see who actually shows up. Friday arrived with a weight that settled on my shoulders like an old winter coat. I dressed deliberately, nothing too flashy, just sharp. A navy blouse, tailored trousers, hair neatly tied back. The kind of look that said, I am not here to entertain you. By 6:45 p.m., I was walking through the doors of a restaurant that used to be our family's go-to for celebrations. It smelled the same rosemary, garlic, fresh linens, but the meaning had shifted. A hostess guided me toward the back where a long table sat beneath a warm pendant light. A small sign rested against the centerpiece. Reserved. For the first time in a very long while, that word did not sting. I placed my hand on the back of the chair at the head of the table and sat down alone for now. The seconds ticked by. Then at precisely 6:57, I heard the familiar clack of heels. Althea was first, Chanel earrings, polished lips, a smile just a little too big. Well, someone is glowing tonight, she cooed, sliding into the seat opposite mine like we were lunching casually at the club. You have been busy, have you not? I did not respond, just tilted my glass slightly, letting the candlelight catch the rim. Malcolm arrived next, always just a beat behind Althea. He still wore that fake investor grin, pasted on like a permanent fixture. Maris, he said, with a tone that tried far too hard to sound brotherly. It has been too long. You look grounded, steady. That is a good thing. Before I could reply, Odette walked in. She did not smile, did not speak. She simply nodded stiffly and took the seat farthest from me. Finally, our mother, Sylvia. She moved slower than I remembered. Time had softened her features, but not her tone. My girls, she said, like it was still 1993, and we were dressed in matching outfits for some staged family photo. Look at us now. I kept my eyes fixed on the napkin folded in my lap. The waitress came to take drink orders. Althea asked for wine. Malcolm copied her. Odette requested only water. Mother wanted chamomile tea. Then the syrup began to flow. Maris Althea purred. I have to say something feels different. There is a calm in your eyes now, almost serene. Are you meditating, or perhaps doing yoga? Malcolm chuckled. Or maybe just making some very smart investments. I have actually been meaning to ask you about a little project I am kicking off. Thought maybe you would want to give it a once-over just as a favor. Sylvia leaned in, clasping her hands together like she was praying. We have all been through so much. She began, her voice dipping into that trembling register she used whenever she wanted to sound fragile. Since your father passed, things have been complicated. We were simply trying to hold everything together. I counted silently in my head. We never you. Not once had they said, we were worried about you. Or, we should have reached out. Just we, as if they were one unit, and I had always been the misfit puzzle piece that never fit. Althea put her wine glass down, finally asking what they had all been dancing around. Are you okay? Her voice was light, but her eyes scanned me carefully, like a detective studying a crime scene. I offered a polite smile, then leaned slightly forward. Did any of you ever wonder what happened to Grandfather's Pennsylvania Land Trust? The shift was instant, like someone had turned the thermostat down 20 degrees. Malcolm blinked. Althea sat up straighter. Sylvia's hands tightened firmly around her teacup. It was Odette who finally broke the silence. That trust was dissolved years ago, was it not? I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it gently on the table. The word active was stamped in bold on the top right corner of the deed. Actually, I said, meeting Odette's stare, it was not. It was forgotten, buried. But I never let it die. Sylvia whispered, her voice breaking. You kept it. I nodded. I rebuilt it quietly, and no one noticed. The waiter appeared as if on cue, holding a leather check holder. Will this be on one bill or separate tonight? I did not even glance at the others. This time I said as I stood slipping the strap of my bag over my shoulder, everyone covers their own. No one spoke. I walked slowly, deliberately past the stunned table of people who once told me I had no head for business, no place at their table. Outside, the air hit my face like a welcome gust of clarity. I was halfway to the corner when I heard footsteps hurrying behind me. Wait! Odette called out, her voice sharper than before. You are not really planning to sell it, are you? Her voice echoed after me as I stepped out into the cool evening. I did not turn around. I did not need to. That single sentence told me everything they had felt the shift. For once I was not reacting. I was leading. And the silence I left in that restaurant that was the loudest statement of all. By Monday afternoon, the sky over the city had dulled to a muted grey, the kind of colour that makes even the tallest glass towers seem sombre and subdued. I walked briskly past the marble facade of the bank, not toward the gleaming main entrance with its polished revolving doors, but down the narrow side corridor most customers never even noticed. A security guard, already expecting me, nodded silently and pressed the biometric panel. The private elevator let out a faint chime as it opened. I stepped inside alone, the doors closing with a kind of finality I had not felt since the day we buried Dad. No music, no mirrors, just brass and breath. It took me directly to the floor that housed the bank's legacy archives vaults, boardrooms, and the real heart of the institution, the vault office. The walls here did not wear screens or artwork. They wore names etched carefully into the stone, men and women who had shaped this city's financial arteries. And now, apparently me. I pushed through the thick oak door into the boardroom. 7 men and women sat arranged around a wide oval table, most of them older, most of them careful, all of them waiting. A few shifted in their chairs. One offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The air carried the crisp chill of legal consequence. I set the folder down in front of me. This is not a courtesy update, I began. This is a legal alignment of trusts, charters, and oversight. As of last Thursday, the 1954 Pennsylvania Legacy Trust once chaired by Edmund Kerrigan, is officially merged into the primary holdings of this bank's foundation. As the named beneficiary, I now hold majority control. There were no gasps, only silence, until Harland Mercer Gray, suit oldest of the group, spoke gently. "You have had this structured for quite some time, have you not?" I looked at him. 14 months. He smiled faintly. "We have been waiting for someone like you ever since Edmund passed." The moment landed heavier than I had expected. 15 minutes later, Althea burst in. Heels too loud, hair perfectly set, eyes wide with sharp confusion. She looked at me like she still had not decided whether I was bluffing or having a breakdown. I slid a sealed envelope across the table toward her. "From legal. For you." Her fingers hesitated, then she opened it. I watched the color fade slowly from her face as her eyes scanned the words: formal removal, ethics clause violation, retaliatory misconduct during fiduciary interaction, all documented, all signed. Malcolm, seated stiffly beside her, tugged at his collar, his voice breaking. "You cannot just take everything. We are your family." I kept my voice even, calm as stone. "Exactly. And that is why I did not take everything. Just the part you all tried to erase." He looked away. No fight left in him. I turned back to the board. "Effective immediately, we will restructure under a revised family ethics charter. No one here will lose their job today. But the long game of nepotism ends right now. Titles will finally match merit. Past behavior will be audited carefully, and every single community-facing fund will undergo a full integrity review." One of the younger board members nodded, clearly relieved. Althea tried to regain footing. "You have always held this resentment." "Have you not?" I shook my head slowly. "I have always held receipts," I replied. "Resentment is optional." Her mouth opened to protest, but she must have thought better of it. The paper in her hand weighed far too much now. The board voted unanimously without even a trace of debate. When the meeting adjourned, I stayed behind alone. I walked through the adjacent corridor, past rows of old vaults. Behind one glass panel, a plaque still bore my grandfather's name. I stopped, looked closer, and right beside it, freshly etched, was mine. It was not about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something they had hollowed out. As I turned to leave, a line from my grandfather's last conversation with me replayed in my mind. "Legacy is not what you leave behind, sweetheart. It is what you clean up." I stepped back into the elevator and descended without a word. That evening, after a long shower and a quiet dinner, I returned to my apartment just past 9. As I reached down to retrieve my keys, I noticed something different. A letter slid under the door. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was from my mother. Later, after returning from the vault, I had changed out of my blazer and heels, lit a single lamp in the corner of my apartment, and tried to ease myself into the quiet. The rain had started not long after I arrived home, tapping its fingers gently against the tall windows, as if it too was waiting for something to break. I was reaching for a blanket when I noticed it again. An envelope slid neatly under my door. No knock, no footsteps in the hall. Just the thing itself lying there as if it had always belonged. I did not need to turn it over. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Sylvia's script, neat, sharp, unflinching. A style that always said everything was under control, even when it clearly was not. I stared at it without moving. Funny how a few strokes of ink could feel heavier than any confrontation I had faced in the boardroom. My fingers hovered for a moment, then pulled back. When someone has cut you out with silence for so many years, even their words can feel like razors. Eventually, I sat down, peeled it open with slow, steady fingers, and began to read. "Maris," it started. "No, my darling, no sweetheart, no softness to land on. There is something I have carried for a very long time, something I should have told you before it ever got this far." The lines were penned cleanly without crossings out or hesitation. She had practiced this, probably rewritten it 3, maybe 4 times before finally letting it go. She wrote about a summer day when I was around 10. I had tried to start a lemonade stand at the end of our driveway. I had drawn posters, worked out prices, even counted the sugar packets one by one. I remembered it vaguely, until she mentioned how Althea had accidentally spilled the jug before I even made my very first sale. I had cried, but I had not understood why my sister had done it. I thought she simply did not like lemonade. But the letter continued, I knew. I saw what she did. I just did not know how to protect both of you. And in the end, I did not protect either. She spoke of my grandfather's passing, of how the family finances had become unstable almost overnight. Malcolm had offered stability, she wrote, but in exchange for that support came Althea's rapid promotion, her early involvement in decisions that should have rightfully been mine. They made it look like security, she wrote, but it was control. And I allowed it. I paused, my hands suddenly colder than the window pane beside me. All this time I had thought her silence was a choice. But maybe it had been survival, not just for her, but for both of us. She did not excuse herself. She did not ask to be understood. I am not writing this for forgiveness, the letter ended, but I am asking you, pleading with you to break the pattern. Do not become what once hurt you. I sat for a long while after that. No tears, no dramatic exhale, just the rain outside and the soft crackle of paper still open in my hand. After some time I stood and crossed to the shelf where I kept fragments of childhood I had never thrown away. In a small box hidden behind old photo frames I found it, a little blue ledger notebook creased and dusty at the corners. Inside were pages of handwritten business plans from a 10-year-old girl trying to figure out what lemonade and kindness had in common. Doodles of coin jars, break-even charts scribbled in marker, and tucked between 2 pages, a wrinkled sticky note with a sentence I had not remembered writing. One day I will have a big vault, and I will not leave anyone out. That little girl had no idea what was coming, but somehow she still knew what mattered most. Maybe I had not changed. Maybe finally I was just remembering who I had been before they tried to break me. The rain picked up, rattling harder now, against the glass, like it wanted me to pay attention. I closed the ledger carefully, placed it back into the box, and stood at the window for a long while watching the city lights blur across the wet pane. Tomorrow I would return, not to ask for space, not to beg for acceptance. Tomorrow I would walk into our childhood home, not as a daughter, but as a reckoning. The wind that morning was sharp, threading through the old wrought iron gate, like a whisper that had waited years to finally be spoken aloud. I stepped onto the familiar stone path without knocking. My heels tapped against the marble foyer, echoing back all the times I had been asked to tiptoe to make myself small in this house. Inside, the warmth of the room did not touch me. Althea's voice floated from the dining hall, thick with performative charm. She was entertaining again extended family, old friends, and likely a few new investors, eager to ride her carefully polished coattails. I knew the kind. I had seen their type at countless biotech galas before. Eyes scanning for status, smiles stretched too wide, teeth too white to be real. I walked straight in. Althea's voice faltered mid-sentence. Forks paused mid-air. A cousin visiting from Vermont coughed uncomfortably into his linen napkin. At the end of the long table, my mother, Sylvia, delicate pearl necklace clasped almost too tightly around her throat, met my eyes directly. She did not look away. Althea blinked once, then forced a thin smile. Well, this is certainly unexpected. I set the thick black folder firmly on the edge of the marble buffet, not even glancing at the delicate canapés she always loved to order to appear worldly. I smoothed the lapels of my coat, looked out calmly across the room and said evenly, "If I may, I would like to make a small withdrawal of the truth." The silence that followed was sharp, tight, and cutting. Althea laughed, that brittle little laugh she always used when she no longer knew where the floor was. "Maris, If this is some kind of dramatic cry for attention— No, I interrupted, turning toward the crowd, my tone steady. This is not drama. This is a matter of documentation and nothing else. I opened the folder and began quietly, steadily. First, the trust, originally signed by our father, with equal distribution, promised between his daughters. Then the forged amendment, dated precisely 2 weeks before his stroke. I displayed a copy of the notary stamp for all to see. Next came the property deeds, the silent reallocation of the family vineyard in Oregon, transferred quietly into an offshore holding account under Althea's shell company. Gasps rippled. Whispers stirred. Then the educational endowment misused. The one meant for young women in STEM fields, which Althea had conveniently repurposed into a personal real estate venture. The funds were pulled under our mother's signature, I added, holding up a PDF copy of the authorization. Althea's lip twitched. She gave me permission. You do not know everything, Maris. She could not have. The date on this, I cut in, is the same day she was undergoing surgery in Zurich. Heads turned. A family friend passed me a laptop. I plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered to life behind me with quiet precision. I scrolled through transaction logs, timelines, and emails. Nothing flashy, just data, just truth. Althea's voice cracked as she tried to find footing. You always needed to be the victim, did you not? I turned toward her slowly. No, I only ever wanted to be seen. You, on the other hand, wanted to erase me. Her hand trembled as she gripped the thin stem of her champagne flute. Our father finally stood up. Althea, he said, voice low but resonant. What on earth have you done? And just like that, the performance cracked. Althea flung her napkin onto the table, her words spilling sharp. This is what she does. She digs and digs until there is absolutely nothing left to bury. She has always been jealous of me, but the room was no longer with her. Relatives began excusing themselves. One couple from our father's side walked out silently without even looking back. Another uncle muttered something about disgraceful behavior before shaking his head and heading for the door. My mother said nothing. She did not move to stop me either. She simply sat there, eyes trained downward on her plate as though listening to something far older than any voice in that room. I turned back to the folder and added one last piece. A letter written in my mother's own unmistakable hand addressed to the family lawyer. It retracted her consent to the transfers. The letter was dated just 6 weeks ago. This house, I said softly, closing the folder with deliberate care, has 2 doors. I looked at Althea one last time. Her face was red, her breath shallow, her hands still trembling on the table. Today, I continued slowly, I walk out through the one you never built, and I left the folder right there on the marble table she had once proudly called her throne. The air outside was cooler now, sharper, cleaner against my skin. Maris walked out only to find a young reporter waiting quietly on the sidewalk. His camera was not raised, just a notebook resting in his hand, and a hesitant smile tugging at his lips. He did not ask a single question. He only said, "Someone wanted you to be heard. Thought you should know that." 1 week later, I sat alone on a weathered wooden bench beneath an old oak tree. The park was quiet this early, the kind of quiet that hums like a secret waiting to be kept or finally told. Golden slivers of sunlight spilled through the leaves, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and distant lilacs. I looked down at the object resting on my lap, a frayed little savings book, faded blue, the kind you would have seen decades ago in a small neighborhood bank. The corners were curled, the ink smudged in places, but it was real, just like the memory of the man who had given it to me. I withdrew everything I needed that day. I murmured softly to myself. But it was never money. After the confrontation at the estate, things unraveled quickly. I never gave a statement to the press. I did not need to. The young reporter, he got his story elsewhere. Apparently someone from inside the bank, maybe a tired clerk weary of keeping quiet, had tipped him off. Not to some trashy gossip column, but to a financial justice blog that took ethics deadly seriously. Then came Walter Pembroke, my grandfather's closest friend. The same man who used to bring peppermint candies tucked in his coat pocket whenever he came to visit. He gave the interview I never would. He talked about Granddad's values, about how he had built the trust for me after watching how invisible I was treated even as a little girl. He told them how my grandfather had once said, "One day she will need to know she mattered to someone. That day will come, mark me." The interview went viral, not in tabloids, but on financial compliance forums, legal groups, and ethics watchdog circles. It struck a nerve, the kind that unravels threads, long-stitched too tight. Within 72 hours, the board at Odette's bank requested her resignation. Quietly, of course, framed as professional. Her license was suspended, pending review. No flashing headlines, no courtroom circus, but enough that she could not hide behind her title anymore. My phone rang 4 times after that. Once from a number I did not recognize but knew by heart, my mother's cell. Once from the estate landline, then again the next morning, and again after. I never picked up. I did not need to hear what they had to say. I already knew. There would be no apology, only panic disguised carefully as concern. Questions like, "Why did you make it public?" or "Why could you not just let things be?" But the truth was, I had let things be for far too long. I shifted on the bench, adjusting my coat as the sun inched higher behind the trees. I opened the savings book gently, careful not to damage its fragile pages. Most of it was blank now, his deposits long withdrawn or quietly moved. But there, tucked into the very back, was something I had never noticed before. Folded into the inside pocket was a yellowing scrap of paper, handwriting, neat and strong. "For the youngest, because she has the biggest heart. Use it when they forget who you are." I blinked hard and then smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear for photographs, but the quiet kind that slips in when something finally settles into its rightful place. I realized in that exact moment that I had never needed their approval. Not my mother's clipped and cautious praise. Not my father's stiff nods of acknowledgement. Not Althea's dismissive glances across the table. What I had now was something sturdier, something no one could take from me myself. I closed the little savings book, slowly let it rest in my lap, and exhaled a long, full breath. There were no fireworks, no victory parade, no grand audience cheering, just stillness, just peace. Across the wide lawn, a low, modern building came into view. Steel and glass, modest, but solid. Nothing like the estates my family clung to. It bore a new sign now, my non-profit's name, embossed carefully in brushed silver. We had just moved in last month, but today would be the very first day I walked through those doors, not with fear or hesitation, but with ownership, with presence, with the certainty that I belonged. This was the real withdrawal. Not the assets sitting in the trust, not the property titles stacked away in folders, not the frozen accounts that had once been dangled like leashes. The withdrawal was my name, my loyalty, my love. I took it all back from the ones who had wasted it, and I invested it somewhere new, somewhere it could grow, flourish, return. It is funny how money reveals character, but silence earns interest too. I stood slowly from the bench, brushing the damp grass off the back of my jeans, and tucked the little savings book gently into my bag. At that very moment, a small flutter caught my eye. A single bird had landed beside me, just out of arm's reach. It did not startle, and it did not beg for crumbs. It was simply present, like it had come to sit with me for a moment to share the stillness of that morning. I did not shoo it away. I did not need to. I just let it be. Walking toward the building, I thought of the younger version of myself. The 10-year-old with a blue ledger doodling coin jars and dreaming of a vault that no one could take away. Maybe I had not really changed after all. Maybe I had finally returned to who I was meant to be before they tried to break me. Life does not hand us closure neatly wrapped. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a breath of rain against glass, in a name etched on a plaque, in a letter folded and left at your door. I had not only survived my family's attempts to erase me, I had rebuilt. And in rebuilding, I had learned something no inheritance could ever buy. Freedom comes when you stop asking permission to exist. So if you have ever felt erased, overlooked, or told you did not belong, know this: your silence can turn into power, and your scars can turn into maps. Share your thoughts and your own story below. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to keep hearing more true stories about strength, family, and finding your voice, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Drop 3 simple words in the comments. Choose your freedom to mark your place in this story. Thank you for being here with me. I will see you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself and never forget what you are worth.